Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session before we start our Inclusive Futures Festival of Workshops and Lectures. Today, we are pleased to welcome the team from London, from the Ecologic Studio, Marco Poletti, Claudia Pasquero, and their team. They will be talking about their project BIT.BIO.BOT that is in Venice, the Venice Biennale. So just to say briefly, next week we will be starting with the first of the lectures as part of the enormous Inclusive Futures event. And at the end of this session, we'll be saying a few words about the lectures themselves and also the workshops. To remind you, on Monday, Monday is the last day to sign up for the workshops and for the lectures, and you can sign up for all the lectures quite separately from the workshops themselves. So I would like to pass over to the team today and like to welcome them once more. We've had a number of very interesting interactions with the team, with Claudia Pasquero and Marco Poletto and so on. So welcome. It's great to have you guys here again.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Nice to be here again. I think it's my fourth time. So this time we will talk about our contributions to the Venice Biennale this year. The theme suggested by the main curator, Asim Sarkis, is how do we live together? Our take on the theme is how do we co-inhabit the planet with non-human form of intelligence? So today we will present three projects that are now on show at the Biennale. The main one is BIT.BIO.BOT, which is present in the Corderia in the main curator exhibition that you see on the back of my colleague there, and in the area denominated by the curator New Household. We will also talk about our contribution to Future Assembly. Future Assembly is an exhibition at the Giardini, which has been curated by an international team of artists, economists, as well as architects, including Olafur Eliasson and Mariangela Mazzucato, which challenge the role of non-human intelligence in the formation of new policies. Ultimately, we will talk about the larger scale of the city with Urban Sphere, our contribution to resilient community for the Italian pavilion. The team today is myself. I'm Claudia Pasquero. I'm director and co-founder of Ecologic Studio, as well as professor of landscape architecture at Innsbruck University and lecturer at the Bartlett UCL. With us is Marco Poletto. Marco Poletto is also director and co-founder of Ecologic Studio, mainly managing director of the company and external examiner in Innsbruck University. We are with us part of our team. Part of our team has already been on this platform in other occasions. Today we have with us Irini Tsomoko. Welcome, Irini. Irini is an architect and computational designer in the Ecologic Studio, as well as teaching fellow at the Bartlett UCL. Corbinian Enziger, a lecturer in Innsbruck University and architect at Ecology Studio. Oscar Villarreal, graduated for the Bartlett B.Pro and designer at Ecology Studio, as well as Claudia Endler, that is a junior architect and researcher in Ecology Studio in Innsbruck University. We would like to thank also Dr. Melissa Sterry and Neil Leach for joining the conversation. So we will start first from a presentation from Marco Poletto, who will introduce the philosophy behind the projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for the introduction, and Neil for the kind of invitation. It's very exciting. Let me share the screen to present this project. Actually, it's the first time that we present it anywhere. It's really fresh from the construction, from the realization. In fact, we just came back from Venice a couple of days ago. So I think we will try to put together a kind of overview of what we have done there in Venice, but also how that ties in with some of the research and work that we have been doing in few years now, and that obviously concerns itself with a kind of extended definition of the we. Claudia was mentioning the brief given by the curators of the Biennale, referred to how we live together, and for us the we takes on a new dimension that goes beyond the human sphere or the society, the human society at large. I have here also the catalog for the Biennale. I don't know if you can see it. It's really nice. So I think I'm going to also read a little bit from that as a part of this short introduction. The project BIT.BIO.BOT, as we named it, is developed by Ecologic Studio, proposes a large-scale experiment in the cultivation of the urban microbiome. So I think two elements here are important. One is the experimental nature of the project. It's actually a living laboratory, if you want to call it like that. And then the idea of the urban microbiome as a kind of expanded dimension across the scales of our understanding of the life that populates our cities. It is designed to test a model of permanent coexistence between human and non-human organisms in the post-pandemic urban sphere. So the idea, of course, to address the condition of post-pandemic is not simply something that we have done because it's everybody does it, but really it's this project reflects our experience, our direct experience as architects, but also as a family, I would say, of this last year and a half. And so in that sense, I think this project really reflects the ideas and also anxieties in a way that we endure, and the necessity, we think, to reimagine frameworks where we can begin to create new circular economies within the city, within the urban realm, but also within the domestic environment. So the project, of course, starts from a larger scale, the scale of the lagoon of Venice, which we will go back to with the next presentations. This image, in fact, comes from one of our early participations at the Biennale in 2008, Architecture Beyond Building, curated by Aaron Betsky, was our first experience with a larger exhibition in Venice at the Biennale. And at the time, we engaged with a topic which somehow it's not far from the one we have been engaging today, although we started from the dynamic substratum of Venice, which is the lagoon itself, and also from the kind of unique microbiome that is present there, and which of course includes organisms such as microalgae and cyanobacteria. The installation's biotechnological architecture acts as a medium to tackle several urban vulnerabilities. This is one of the ambition of this project, is not so much to propose an installation as an object, but rather as a system. So we have been designing a system that is in fact trying to disrupt the patterns of consumption and production that are bringing or have brought us to the current crisis. And its core biological mechanism is photosynthesis, of course, powered by the sun and by the metabolism of living cultures of Spirulina platensis and Chlorella sp. And these are actually some of the oldest organisms that we can find on Earth. They are edible and highly nutritious cyanobacteria, and are capable of remetabolizing pollutants that are present in the air and in the water. So we are looking at a biological mechanism that has evolved in so many years and is actually able to use its biological intelligence to perform these circular processes of filtration and production of nutrients in a way that is impossible to many other living systems on Earth. So this exhibition, as I was mentioning before, is a real urban laboratory. This is a view from the top of what you will find if you visit the Corderie dell'Arsenale in Venice. it combines advanced architecture with microbiology to build an artificial habitat, a dwelling where urban algae can be grown collectively. So the idea of dwelling here really goes beyond the sort of domestic realm that we all know, and becomes really connected with this notion of habitat. So the ability to create an environment, a hybrid environment where humans and microorganisms, as well as digital systems, effectively communicate and coexist and are able to mutually enhance their chances of evolution. So, of course, formally, we kind of played with this idea of the multiple systems speaking a language that connects to the, let's say, aesthetic of the lab, but also very much to the aesthetic of the factory, of a production system, of a high-density production system. But then again, with the curtains, as you can see, we have also connected back to the fabric of Venice, in this case, the walls of the Arsenale that are themselves, in a way, occupied by their own unique microbiome of mosses and other organisms. So this idea of a collective protocol, of course, is translated to the larger dimension of Venice as well. And so the project has expanded with an installation in the Italian pavilion, as Claudia was mentioning, that explores this other dimension where the city of Venice is reimagined through the application of AI algorithms to effectively become symbiotic to the lagoon and the lagoonal forces and patterns and logics of evolution. So in this way, Venice itself is observed in this process of coevolution with the lagoon. The same applies to the system of growing algae that we have mentioned before. And so the idea is really to combine advanced architecture with microbiology, as I said, to build artificial habitats. Every phase of this project, from the conception, its fabrication, the cultivation, and the post-biennale repurposing, contributes to this experiment of coexistence. And here are some of the visions that you will see again later that express this idea at the scale of the dwelling as an urban landscape, as a new kind of conception of the urban landscape. So to begin to zoom in a little bit more on the exhibition, there are three main systems that are forming this urban laboratory. And the one is the living cladding, which are these kind of curtain, photosynthetic curtain, which are acting as a sort of filter between the inside and the outside. And then there is the vertical garden, that is the more productive part, where culture are grown optimally, and it is made with this modular structure that can be expanded and grown opportunistically as the time passes. And then finally, the convivium presents the other moment, the consumption and the enjoyment of this new found relationship. And this is the part that is that presents a new experiment we have done of glass 3D printing with the unique technology of Swarovski. And out of this collaboration, we have created these 36 unique glasses or glassware that allows to expand the aesthetic and perceptual experience of feeding yourself in this new way. As I was mentioning, the advanced architectural system is the result of 10 years of biodigital design research and combines computational design strategies, the BIT in the title, with proprietary digital fabrication techniques, the BOT, to implement a collective microbiological cultivation protocol, which is the BIO. Again, you see here some of the details of the system, which it is quite important to notice has been designed so that each unit is independent and modular, meaning that the system is completely reversible, can be repurposed, remodeled, expanded, contracted, and every single part can be recycled. And in the case of the plastic elements, which you see here are custom 3D printed, can be also composted. So again, the philosophy of design permeates every element of the project, and the idea of growth and expansion or contraction is built into the very detail of the project itself and its design philosophy. Here are some of the images that describe the development of the morphology for the glassware, the 3D printed glassware. And here you see a close-up of some of these really beautiful and unique crystal objects, which again are on one side beautiful in themselves, of course, but on the other side also enable us to expand the visual and tactile and experiential qualities of consuming drinks reinforced with microalgae, and therefore really beginning to build a sort of culinary culture around this way of feeding through microorganisms. So as I mentioned, the idea, the philosophy of the project is that it's a continuous development. And as we know, the Biennale lasts only 6 months. So it was our intention to build and develop this project with the kind of after Biennale in mind. And so we were lucky enough to partner with other organizations such as Swarovski and the project in Battens. And in this way, we have secured a future to the project itself, which will be relocated and will continue his life. And I think what is important about this is that it will then begin to develop its educational purpose. We actually believe that the interaction with this installation will expand the possibilities of its future development. So in that sense, it's really a collaborative project that goes beyond our team. So the idea is that this will become an educational algae garden, which will be accessible to community and as well as students. The microbiological gardens will be part of a biology lab and educational program in Battens, and pupils will be able to use them regularly to develop novel urban practices of planetary cultivation. So finally, the post-Biennale collective experiment will inform the future of BIT.BIO.BOT into a distributed synthetic urban organism in which bacteria, autonomous electronic devices, digital algorithms, and other forms of non-human intelligence will ultimately coexist. And I will close here and leave the space to my colleagues and partners to go more into the detail of this fascinating project. Thank you.
Thanks, Marco. So now we will have Irini Tsumoko with Claudia Endler presenting more in detail the application of BIT.BIO.BOT presented at the Corderie as new household. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Marco, for the introduction. The whole space configuration is composed from the 3 main parts that were mentioned before by Dr. Poletto: the living cladding, the vertical garden, and the convivium. So these 3 parts combine the system of the whole. The living cladding redefines the limits between human and non-human realms and between architectural, indoor and outdoor. It is composed of 10 photosynthetic curtains. The unique version unveiled at the Corderia features a morphological pattern inspired by the surrounding brick walls, highlighting the microbiological nature of the Venetian architectural fabric. Furthermore, its articulation increases the interaction between microalgae growth and the biogel medium and the environment, as well as their screening and shading potential. Each biodigital curtain is 3 meters high and 1 meter wide, and features 35 meters of digital welding, which forms a cavity capable of containing 7 liters of microalgae cultures. This membrane application is based on the successful testbed projects by Ecologic Studio in Milan, Dublin, and Helsinki, where photosynthetica has been applied outdoor to a public canopy and building facade. As here you can see the system of the architectural skill in Milan and the system in Milan. So, in terms of seed scale, Photosynthetica software developing in Ecologic Studio includes a package of algorithms and interfaces connected with embedded sensing and actuating mechanisms. It is able to record parameters from the microalgae culture medium and from the surrounding ERPA environment in real time and inform the design choices, pattern of use, and maintenance protocol. In other words, they effectively deploy the macroalgae metabolic power to transform the urban microclimate and related local air quality. So you can see also the circularity diagram that we are using in photosynthetic. The second part is the vertical garden. The vertical garden creates a thick buffer zone located between the living cladding and the convivium, dedicated to an intensive model of vertical algae farming. On a 3 meter tall and completely reversible stainless steel structure, it hosts 15 biobombulas. Biobombola was developed as the proprietary domestic algae garden system developed by Ecologic Studio in response to the challenges of the first COVID-19 lockdown in spring 2020. Each unit of vertical garden, made of lab-grade borosilicate glass and 3D printed bioplastic components, hosts 10 liters of microalgae culture in a highly efficient growing medium. In the video is recorded the inoculation of the algae inside the corderia. Algae can be independently harvested from each unit several times per week to collect up to 100 grams of biomass, which is daily recommended protein intake of a family of 4. While active in production, the vertical garden is able to absorb CO2 at a rate equal to 3 large mature trees, providing a clear path to carbon neutrality in architecture. This system is based on the real-time monitoring system, developing in Ecologic Studio that includes a series of sensors that can be installed independently to provide different levels of monitoring, as we applied in Biobombola project. The core sensors are aquatic sensor and environmental sensors. Aquatic sensor monitor algae growth conditions inside of the bioreactors. The sensoring measure typically the 4 main factors affecting algal growth and metabolism. These are salinity, pH, oxygenation reduction potential, and temperature. Environmental sensor register microclimate conditions around and outside the photobioreactors. These are typically temperature, humidity, and light sensor. Their input is used to automate the key actuating device to moderate climate extremes and can damage the cultures. Photosynthetica adopts also a big data approach to air pollution monitoring, powered by a custom algorithm and dedicated GUI. Urban pollutants data are collected via weather station of the specific city or project area, where it shows real-time air quality index. The measurements are then organized in a circular diagram with 365 values corresponding to the days, deviated equally in the main circle of 5 homocentric circular zones that represents the AQI levels. This protocol follows a 2-level analysis approach. More specifically, the air pollution filtering performance is tested in 3 phases: static local monitoring, geolocated local monitoring, comparative analysis. The first phase establishes local ambient air quality in relationship to health impact-related thresholds. The second tracks air quality changes within the local microclimate and in the immediate vicinity of photosynthetic. The third compares these results with the average data from the local weather station and the status of the living culture in the reactors. In this phase, we use a portable sensor, a personal air quality tracker with local weather station. And then the last part, the convivium. The convivium is a space for sharing, for collective experimentation on the future of food. It takes the form of 2x2 meter Dave, which hosts 36 unique pieces of crystal glassware designed to encourage experimentation in the consumption of the freshly harvested chlorella and spirulina cells, both of which are among the most nutritious organisms on Earth. The crystal glassware is designed by Ecologic Studio and 3D printed by Swarovski with its groundbreaking glass printing technology. Each piece is made of delicately fused glass layers arranged in a matrix that algorithmically follows the morphogenesis of microalgae cells, thus generating a variety of visual patterns. The metabol algorithm was applied in the generate points used two main parameters: the growth of the charges that is growing in the z direction and the spin parameter. This will offer a multiplicity of opportunities to observe, transform, and taste microalgae as part of a new culinary landscape. The whole design process of the glass underlined the coexistence of algorithmically grown and biologically grown colonies of algae, as it was applied in a Bioseri project last year by Ecologic Studio, exchanging data with the 3D printed technology. Another 3D print technology project was also Hortus Excel. And so in this digital era, an interaction is emerging between creation and the fields of life science, neuroscience, and synthetic biology. The notion of living takes on a new form of artificiality that permeates the entire urban sphere, the global apparatus of contemporary urbanity. Here, another 3D printed living sculpture, Hortus Excel, receptive to human and non-human life, with a bigger vision integrated to photosynthetic tower elements. In the last one.
Thank you, Irini. Thanks. So now we will go on with Oscar Villarreal, which will introduce a jump in scale from the scale of the microalgae and of the direct interaction with the household to the micro-urban scale and the proposal that we developed for future assembly. Thank you, Oscar.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to present the part of the future assembly intervention in the urban scale of the BIT.BIO.BOT. The future assembly is a response to curator Hashim Sarkir's invitation to imagine a design inspired by the United Nations to come together in this more than human proposal. It's organized by Studio Other Spaces with a collaboration of different people such as Claudia introduced. And what describes this exhibition is the future assemblies structured around reciprocity and collaboration and coexistence. So for the stakeholder that was presented by Ecologic Studio, it's a way of these coexistence and collaborations of them, including the more than human, to find this representation of how they can take a seat on the table. So in order to achieve this idea, the BIT.BIO.BOT as a new type of system applied to the urban realm following biological intelligence started from the concept of being a new form of coexistence and creating this grid that allowed us to generate this environment full of different typologies and generation of a new program that this distributing in the Corderia will eventually become a new type of living in the way of we try to distribute and create this architectural system of the BIT.BIO.BOT, but as a new interaction. After understanding the different elements involved in the plan, factors such as energy and heat in the environment, CO2 produced by humans, O2 released by biobombolas, and all of the nutrients released by the different elements of the algae, the plan became an analytical version of the system. This allowed us to understand and unify all of these external and internal factors that changed and interfere with the installation and the architectural system. So once we have these different factors, we decided to create this unified plan where we have the background representing all of these nutrients and oxygen and CO2 and light, heat, and all of these parameters, and how they relate with the BIT.BIO.BOT installation architecture of the different typologies that Irini explained, and this distribution around the Corderia. But at some point, we wanted to understand this more than human seat in the table, so we took the approach of creating a speculative urban distribution. So in order to push the algae into the conversation, we analyzed the behavior of algae cells in the microscope image, and we observed that the organism has its own organization skills and its own distribution intelligence. We took the algae as a core biological engine, transferring distribution intelligence to a larger organizational system using the artificial intelligence of the generative adversarial network. So we tested the BIT.BIO.BOT urban plan together with the microscopic image of the algae cells in order to obtain a combined result that helped us reimagine this distribution system. So this catalog shows the results obtained by the GAN, transferring the information between the two inputs and getting an interpretation of the plan as algae cells and the algae cells as the plan. So we can observe here how we're transferring and creating this unified urban plan of the Corderia, but with the behavior of the algae and other way around too. So watching the evolution of this generative adversarial network, we have this video that shows how this formation of the speculative urban distribution appears. In this first video, we see the behavior of the plan being transformed by algae. So this plan is becoming algae distributed everywhere, which is one of the outputs of the GAN, where we involve this artificial intelligence. And as you can see, you have these elements that you can recognize from the Corderia, but now they become algae and basically it will be an interaction of humans with algae. And as a second result, we have what we'd like to use in this speculative design is how we take the intelligence of the algae cell and convert it with the BIT.BIO.BOT architectural system at the urban landscape. So basically, we are creating this new plan, this new distribution that is formed using the human BIT.BIO.BOT system, but organized as the algae intelligence by itself. So this plan becomes a prototypical installation that combines the human program, the non-human algae intelligence, and the artificial intelligence of the GAN to obtain this final result. These are the images taken from the Future Assembly exhibition inside the Biennale, where we show on one side the formation catalog to understand a little bit more how do we get to the other side of the image, which is the speculative urban distribution. And it's a way of proving how do we grow from a material system installation to this speculative urban distribution based on the algae intelligence. So in a way, from this point, we try to understand how this biotechnological architecture based on the algae cell behavior can be seen as a three-dimensional landscape. How can this distribution generated by the biointelligence of algae be transferred into a real urban realm? So we started taking this plan generated by the biological intelligence and the artificial intelligence and started to extract it and locating the BIT from the BIT.BIO.BOT system to grow the structure from here. So we take these elements and start growing the metal structure, the different grids, the biobombolas, the curtains, and start to populate this environment based on what we see in the Biennale installation. So basically, we generate this landscape proposal, this urban proposal based on the speculative plan, using these elements that you saw in the photos from the Biennale installation. This environment shows us how the human starts to coexist with the algae, and its new daily routine becomes this cultivation and this experimentation with algae, having these lifts that can help the human interact with it and cultivate and have these, extract these elements, these nutrients that previously Irene and Marco discussed, that this become really powerful for the human. So we have another view from this application, which talking about Venice, we started to explore this idea of having this speculative BIT.BIO.BOT system, urban system, distributed in Venice. So specifically in the Venice Lagoon. So we start to incorporate elements from Venice Lagoon, which is the water, and this interaction between water, BIT.BIO.BOT system, nature, non-humans, and humans, and creating this new environment that becomes the new type of living in the more than human part of Future Assembly, but also as a how we will live together, defined in the idea where BIT.BIO.BOT search for the Venice Biennale. This is another view where we see the dimension of these structures, and we see how these volumes become the new habitat, the new living, and the new buildings for the humans and the non-humans applied or distributed along Venice. So this system allows us to interact and to generate new programs, new typologies, and with the different grids that start from the first cells and grids we generate at the beginning, we have these different walls and flooring systems and ceilings, and basically this bit that creates this structure, these metal structures that become distributed along Venice, help us to have this speculative urban distribution together with its biotechnological architecture that has the potential to redistribute cities and pursue a new type of living. This creates interaction with properties not necessarily human. Thank you, and I think I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thanks, Oscar. Thank you. So now we will continue with the application of this philosophy and methodology at the territorial scale with the project Urban Sphere that we have been presenting at the Italian Pavilion Resilient Community. And the project include work that we have developed in the last 3 years with the UNDP, the development program of UN, as well as a research that was started with the Centre Pompidou in Paris as part of their exhibition series, Mutation and Creation. And that a second iteration of this work will be presented later in February at the Centre Pompidou. So for now, what we have for Venice, thanks, will be presented by Corbinian Erzinger. Thank you, Corbinian.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for the introduction and the invite. So yeah, I'm basically picking up where Oscar left, how we're going to scale this whole idea up on the urban scale. So as our part, or as our contribution to the Italian Pavilion in Venice, we developed a video installation titled The Urban Sphere, which is using machine learning algorithms coupled with the biological intelligence, in this case, the Fusarium polycephalum, which is also known as the slime mold. It explores a protocol to design the urban sphere, or what we may call the urbanization of the non-human, titled Deep Green. The machinic perspective unveils a new post-anthropocentric reality where the impact of artificial systems on the natural biosphere is indeed global, but their agency is no longer entirely human. So with the development of the Deep Green, we are testing the potential to bring at the core of architectural and urban design research the interdependence of digital and biological intelligence. To better explain the proposed Deep Green workflow, I'd first like to elaborate how we're using this unpaired image-to-image translation using conditional GANs, which are also used as cycle GANs, in order to translate the digital as well as the biological intelligence into new urban scenarios. Following the Deep Green design protocol, machine learning algorithms are used as an environmental tool that allows us to process and interpret the compressed information of the pixels to the urban realm. So the starting points are basically two images, which are on this slide. You can see it's called input A and input B. The original input images are then divided into smaller tiles, which are translated from input A into input B and vice versa. And afterwards, the algorithm does the translation in the opposite direction and compares the result to the initial input image. And through this process, the machine learning algorithm is able to detect its own accuracy and therefore self-improves over time. With this training process of the machine learning algorithm, it's usually done over 200 epochs, as you can see in the catalog on the left side, which adds up to a calculation time of about 16 hours for one training session. And it allows us to convert any input image into a desired output image. So the example in the current frame is a recent project that we developed in the last year in the Synthetic Landscape Lab in Innsbruck, where we were investigating the hydrology of the Kathmandu Valley in order to develop new strategies of how the urban sprawl, which could take place, that entirely adapts to the hydrology of the landscape and therefore is able to minimize the risks of floods and landslides, while at the same time reducing the impact of water pollution in the area. Depending on the input image, different scenarios can be created. In this case, the newly proposed landscape is based on various erosion simulations and the existing rural areas, and in this case, the urban areas of the Kathmandu Valley. Here you can see a little zoom in what the actual transformation based on the erosion simulations finally looks like. The Deep Green workflow, it can be deployed to assess urban vulnerabilities and find specific urban design solutions to achieve immediate as well as long-lasting impact. In the case of Kathmandu, the first input information is entirely based on digital calculations of water and erosion, while the second input is based on the actual urban and rural structure of the Kathmandu Valley. The final proposal describes a master plan of Kathmandu, which allows the urban center to expand further while reducing the impact on the local and global ecology. In the installation of the Italian pavilion called Urban Sphere, we are coupling this artificial intelligence with the biological intelligence of the Fusarium polycephalum. The proposed design workflow that enables pairing of what is algorithmically drawn with what is biologically grown, as Claudia was mentioning it before. So just as an explanation, the Fusarium polycephalum is a unicellular organism which is known for being capable of solving the shortest walk problem and creating optimized path networks between existing food sources. And this characteristic makes the organism kind of an ideal tool to develop new urban scenarios entirely disconnected from conventional human-centered design approaches. We use the deep green workflow to transfer the behavioral patterns of the Fusarium polycephalum onto the urban structure of Venice as well as Paris. The objective is to investigate how its biological intelligence can be applied on different scales to reinterpret existing infrastructures and building distributions of the city. When the trained GAN Fusarium is then deployed, it actualizes the capabilities of the Fusarium polycephalum in solving problems of urban remetabolization, carbon neutrality, energetic self-sufficiency, and increased biodiversity. But most importantly, these ambitious objectives are tackled within a non-human conceptual framework, and therefore opening up a whole new palette of potential design solutions in the urban realm. The video, which I'm going to show afterwards, or which is also displayed at the Italian Pavilion at the Biennale, depicts this design workflow, which is applied on two different locations. So here you can see one frame of the first application, which represents the typology of Venice, coupled with the biological intelligence of the slime mold, and therefore redistributing these lagoon networks that are currently existing in Venice. So it basically, yeah, we can reimagine how the city could look like if it was based on the behavioral patterns of the Fusarium polycephalum. The second part shows the same workflow deployed on Paris and also altering between various scales of the city. We first can see in this frame right here the translation of the slime mold on a 10 by 10 kilometer frame of the city. We then further zoomed in and trained the algorithm again on a 3 by 3 kilometer square, later a 1 by 1 kilometer square, and as a final step, we went into a 100 by 100 meter square of the city, which is actually showing the Centre Pompidou transformed by the slime mold. And you can see it's kind of picking up details first from the roof itself and also from the plaza in front of the Centre Pompidou. Depending on the input images, these procedures allow us to implement the pathfinding capabilities of the Fusarium polycephalum as a biological computer, as well as the existing typology to create a new urban scenario. And by carefully choosing the locations of the food source as an input, we can partially control and therefore more precisely speculate about how green networks could be implemented in the urban realm based on the biological intelligence of the Fusarium. In order to show this transition between the existing city topology and the newly proposed networks, we recorded a time lapse of the growing process of a slime mold and then translated each of these frames using the deep green workflow. The final video in the end consists of over 5,000 individually translated images, which adds up to a total of over 10 days of processing time. And to wrap it up, I would like to show you the part of the video, which is currently displayed in the Italian Pavilion, which is visualizing the application of the deep green workflow on the urban scale. Thanks for your attention already. Sorry, I'm gonna reshare quickly to share the sound with it.
Oscar, actually, could we not have the sound because it might be a copyright problem? Oscar?
There is no copyright. It's our sound.
Oh, I see. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks.
We have no speaking in this part, but it's our sound. So this is the first part of the video that is in display at the Italian Pavilion. And the sound is developed by us also through critical means. The first part shows the transformation of Venice and Paris through Ganfisario. The second part, that is for the moment only showing Venice, we will not show here, show a project we've been developing with the UNT, where we apply this technique to digitally the figures. I leave the video running now.
Ubiquitous computing enable us to understand and decipher the biosphere anthropogenic dimension, what we have called the urban sphere. This machinic perspective unveils a new post-anthropocentric reality, where the impact of artificial systems on the natural biosphere is indeed global, but their agency is no longer entirely human. Explore a protocol to design the urban sphere, or what we may call the urbanization of the non-human, that we title Deep Green. With the development of Deep Green, our team is testing the potential to bring at the core of architectural and urban design research the interdependence of biological and digital intelligence. This is achieved by developing a new computational design workflow that enables pairing what is algorithmically drawn with what is biologically grown. In other words, and in more detail, we will illustrate how GAN, Generative Adversarial Network algorithm, can be paired and trained to behave like a Physarum polycephalum, a unicellular organism endowed with surprising computational ability and self-organizing behavior that have made it popular among scientists and engineers alike. The trained GAN Physario is deployed as an urban design technique to test the potential of polycephalum intelligence in solving problems of urban remetabolization and in computing scenarios of urban morphogenesis within a non-human conceptual framework.
Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Corbinia. So now I will before opening to the conversation, we will demonstrate 1 second a real live harvest. I will get ready. Okay, we have here one of our Biobot. And I need some help. Lulu, please. So this we go back to the material scale, and we have devised this photobioreactor, as was discussed in the presentation, to demonstrate how we could create a daily interaction with material practices and biotechnology. In this case, the biobombola contains spirulina. Spirulina has got very large cell, some of the largest in terms of microalgae. So it can be harvested daily through a sieve. There will be Giacomo doing this, but we have Giacomo at the moment.
Can you show it closer to the camera?
Yes, we are.
What is emerging there?
Okay, we have some here. You can see it. So basically, the spirulina get harvested and remain on the top of the sieve. And then we can wash it and taste it directly. So
can you show the close-up? Yeah.
The filter here, yeah. This is spirulina that we harvest now. And this is the spirulina that Giacomo and Lulu harvested before. Yeah. So basically, each teaspoon of spirulina has got the same amount of protein of a T-bone steak. So the idea is that by working with spirulina at home, we could tackle many of the issues of ecology directly by remetabolizing pollutant, as it was said before, but also by producing nutrients for ourselves, different nutrients from the one we are consuming currently. So we can open up to questions. Thanks you for following this live demonstration. Okay, cool. I think we can open up the question if also Melissa and Neil want to join.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. Grazie, Neil. It's great. I assume this is your daughter.
Yes, she is. Actually, usually she does it with Giacomo, but Giacomo is not here at the moment.
She's hiding from the camera. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was just, I was wondering because, I mean, today has actually been a great session in many ways because it encapsulates so many different things. I mean, to my mind, if there are two game changers in the world today, it's been COVID-19 and it's AI. And your whole project is kind of caught up in that whole kind of discourse. But then there are all these kind of like connected and associated issues. I think that the other thing that became incredibly far-sighted in retrospect, or very prescient, was Hashim Sarkis's kind of question: how will we live together? And here we are living together in a way that we would have imagined when he made that title. We're literally living together on a screen in many different places all over the world. I am the only one in Venice, Venice, California, and Antonio
we were in the old Venice. We need somebody.
Yeah.
We need somebody in Venice, Macau, and then we are okay.
Yeah, well, there's also Venice in Las Vegas, of course, the Venetian. So and Venice in, I think, in Florida as well. So but this is so. Yeah, in some ways, it was an incredibly far-sighted comment, because it goes also with, let's say, some of the social issues that have been raised during the pandemic, the kind of the whole Black Lives Matter, about living together, the issues that kind of came across about of kind of nationalism, of people competing, of nations competing for the different sort of treatments for the virus. And now we have this situation whereby the West is so far ahead of other countries like Africa. So it's really highlighted the imbalance in the world. So there are many kind of issues that have kind of been foregrounded by this thing. And plus the fact that just from an environmental point of view, I think we've got into a sort of paradigm shift whereby people are now beginning to realize we can have conferences online. We haven't got to fly everywhere to do it. And of course, COVID also had a huge impact on preserving, to some extent, or reducing carbon emissions, and so on. And then Venice itself is, to my mind, the kind of epitome, maybe, of our world. You know, a world that is at risk from global warming and risk from flooding, and yet a city, one of the few cities in the world where we don't have cars. You know, all this together is just kind of somehow encapsulated something about our present moment that makes it unbelievably kind of topical in many ways. And so, plus, of course, the environmental agenda that you're dealing with in your studio, Claudia. So it's somehow, I mean, it's almost there's too much to think about, but it's kind of, it's all right here, right now in what you've been presenting. So I don't know, I just want to kind of raise that as a kind of question about, you know, how extraordinary this whole event has been in terms of kind of somehow making us aware of all of these kind of issues that have come onto the international agenda. Everybody needs to be addressing these questions. Yeah,
I think there is it's really important for us to tackle this question on multiple levels. And you mentioned the fact that the how we live together and the question of diversity has never been more important. I share this statement, but I also think that to be able to change the way we live together and to increase the level of diversity in work and environment, as well as in the way we interact one with the other in social environment, we need to change our social framework and the city where we live in. It's not enough to add diversity or to increase the diversity in the work environment. That is an action that sometimes is needed, but is very top down and doesn't resolve the issue at the core. Doesn't resolve and doesn't change the way we effectively live and the integration between us and the environment, between our different part of our life and the environment itself, which is a topic that, of course, was debated quite a lot during the Biennale, but I think not enough has been done in trying to really rethink the framework. Even, you know, the way we consume, which is something tackled by the project, but even the relationship between the family, between the leisure and the work environment and the family. How do we consider that? How do we restructure that? If we want, for example, women or a wider variety of human beings before non-human to take part seriously in the work environment, we need to facilitate that from the way we design the city and from the way we design our relationship. Otherwise, it will not work. And this is a subject I usually don't tackle so much, but in the Biennale, because I'm a woman and I'm an Italian architect, apparently a rare species, I've asked about this question many times. And usually I like to talk about diversity in a wider manner and not simply about the relationship between, men and women. But if we talk about the relationship between men and women, and because Lulu was here, we need to talk how we restructure the environment where we live to actually allow that to happen. And meaning also the relationship between, the family and the urban content, the family and the work, how we consume and produce, and the city.
Maybe I could just pick up on this and go further. I mean, it seems to me that kind of like the city becomes also a kind of an issue to be addressed in some ways, because I mean, I think that the knock-on effect of COVID is going to be a kind of like something that a trickle down when we'll eventually see not right now, but eventually in a few years' time we will see precisely how things have changed. And I think one of the kind of the big issues here is whether working practices, not just whether we'll go back to having in-person conferences, everyone flying all over the world to do that. And it's clear that already this format is allowing for a cheaper, more environmentally friendly conversation, that's for sure. But whether in fact, the city itself, which is, whether offices, I mean, what's going to happen in terms of real estate in the city? Now, it seems to me that what we've been doing over the years is kind of excluding nature from the city. Now is the chance almost to allow nature to reassert itself, in the sense that there are going to be spaces they're going to be vacated, not being used. And whether we can imagine strategies whereby we recolonize, repopulate a kind of not a sort of rus in urbe, a kind of like a countryside in the city itself, whether we can look at urban agriculture in a fresh way, whether we can look at kind of greening the city and so on, as a kind of a strategy will itself kind of revitalize the city, but in a different way to how we've operated before. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Marco.
No, if I just jump in 1 second, because I think this is a really important aspect that goes to the topic of let's say hybridizing typology and the kind of division of usage of spaces. And I think that one of the core elements of the design that we presented here, but I think also going back on our recent research is to use to try to develop a new kind of aesthetic for this idea of urban agriculture, for this idea of integrating nature in cities, and aesthetic that really enabled us to blur the boundaries between what is considered rural or agricultural to what is considered scientific or lab-like and working related to what is considered gardening or leisurely or home related. And so in a way the idea is that the kind of spaces that we have tried to come up with, and also the technology that make them up, are kind of designed to create a new possibility to blur these conditions, so that one can kind of fluidly bounce between something that an activity that has a high level of research embedded into it to something that actually you can do with a kid and that is rather leisurely, and then all of a sudden use it to feed yourself or to sell to your exchange to your neighbors and so on and so forth. So it somehow blends these different functions in a much more fluid way, and sort of also enables whoever takes ownership of this space and this technology to actually create their own version of it, or their own way of using it, and their own way of processing the outcome of this technology. So in that sense, they are very much kind of open to this idea of collective intelligence that we have been exploring, at a larger scale with this kind of digital tools. I think at the scale of the architectural device, they are meant to really embody this idea or this vision.
Maybe I can push that even further. To my mind, the office is kind of really almost the office culture that we've inherited or had inherited is almost the most problematic aspect of contemporary culture today. By that I mean not just kind of like the pervasive kind of logic of air conditioning. I mean, there are very few systems. If you think about some of the traditional systems of wind towers and things that actually were were developed in places like Iran that are very effective ways of using kind of natural systems to ventilate and so on. The office ignores all that. It's simply air conditioning with these huge air conditioning plants on the roof and so on. And that plus the kind of corporate culture, the idea that it's all about profit and profit alone. In some ways, I think if we could see this whole thing as a kind of crisis, a kind of wake-up call to start kind of really to resetting our outlooks and thinking how we can kind of totally change our position, that itself would be a kind of an incredible thing to come out of this pandemic. Of course, it's challenging. I mean, we're going to have a huge building stock, of places that have got air conditioning in it. I don't know how you repossess, refurbish, relocate that. I mean, maybe that is a design challenge for Ecologic Studio.
Yeah, I believe that I totally agree with you on that, and I think this gives another dimension to the whole digital elements, because as Irini was mentioning before, we've been doing a lot of work in terms of monitoring, in terms of integrating within this system multiple sensing apparatuses. But again, the idea is once you have the data, what do you do with it, right? I mean, is it about optimizing everything, or it is about giving a voice, let's say, to the different systems that are coexisting, therefore creating this optimization impossible from the point of view of the kind of reductionist idea of a static optimal, like the one that regulates offices these days, and really push towards this kind of idea of coexistence that is much more generative and open-ended, and therefore calls for the kind of redefinition also of the separation between the indoor outdoor and the way we use or benefit from the kind of gradients of temperature, heat, humidity, wind that surrounds us. And like we know, renewable energies are everywhere. If you want, by definition, every bit of space contains a certain amount of renewable energy. So the question is really how much we can index every pixel of air, if you want, and every centimeter that surrounds us in this way. And I think in a sense the whole idea of the BIT.BIO.BOT, it's really a little bit about that. It's about considering the space as a kind of matrix, as a voxelated space, which is essentially endowed with the qualities that are both digital, biological, and of course physical material, and we can just play with them in a much more generative way.
Yeah, in a way, these type of spaces were still conceived with in mind the first industrial revolution and the social segregation between working environment, production, and family as three main zoning. And in a way, this is an opportunity to completely rethink them and restructure them, but somebody needs to think how we restructure things and how we engineer more integration. This from the conceptual point of view, but from the material system point of view, the whole system of air conditioning is about the whole M&E and piping that has always been outside of the often been outside, apart from the case studies of the Center Pompidou maybe and the Lloyds, outside of the conversation of architecture that deals more with tectonics and structural relationship and computation and how these relate to the form that comes out. But we believe that the morphology or the morphogenesis of the building is really integrated with this system. And so how do we design the M&E? How M&E become part of the computational or biocomputational research in architecture and become part of the space and the architecture itself. Therefore, defining also a different relationship between the user that maybe is not simply there to work, but is also there to enjoy or to produce or in a material sense, and change the programmatic characteristic of the space by changing the way we design it and conceive it. I think maybe Melissa had a question before, if I'm not wrong, but.
I was going to comment that I think what really stands out about your work, and particularly in the Venice piece, your latest work, is that it's working on all scales. It's working at the grand scale of the landscape, and it's working at the intimate scale of the human. And what's very clear is that this is not incidental. This is not, this is not something that has sort of happened by accident. One of the things that one of the reasons I often critique projects is because they lack depth. And when you look at project briefs and when you look at how, the context in which those projects were developed, it's very clear as to why. It's because there simply wasn't the time or there wasn't the resources. And when we look to the wider STEM and science and technological community, and indeed you could argue with design, some of the most interesting work develops slowly, slow science, slow design. It emerges at its own pace, and because of that, as it were, slowness, which I think in your case is the fact that what we're seeing now is it's the product, if you like, of, as Marco was saying, this is more than a decade's work. This is many, many different strands that are naturally converging now. And if you like, the benefit of that is that on the one hand, if we look out to what else is going on, we can see that there are a lot of very sophisticated technological projects. We can see, Microsoft Research doing some incredible work, with DNA storage and DNA printing even now, and all sorts of things. And then we can look somewhere else and we can find, some really interesting sustainability projects for the home, but often these things are very fragmented, and actually they're not really working, well, not so much the DNA storage, but some elements, if you like, of this wider sustainability agenda simply don't work together. They work independently, but when you subject them to sophisticated analysis, they start to fall over. But in your works, and I think particularly with the Venice piece, we're seeing that this, you know your subject matter so innately now. Your studio know it's, everyone in the studio is so familiar with all of these key subjects and the different lenses through which we have to view a project if we're really going to subject it to the highest level of interrogation, and if it's really going to, as it were, pass the best standards in diligence testing. That this is coming naturally to you. And I really like the fact that this is something that is working at the human level, because what you've effectively done is you've made subjects that are actually quite scary. They're they're sort of so technical, they're so complicated that for most ordinary people on the street, even, intelligent folks, they're sort of remote. They're not things that are very tangible, and they're certainly in most cases not aspirational. But in the glassware and in the way that this has been presented, this is entirely relatable. This is something that you can look at and think, my goodness, I can visualize this sophisticated new paradigm that is manifesting. I can do it in a way I can actually touch it. I can taste it, even I can smell it. So it's got that tangibility. And then, of course, from that, yes, these although the conversations grow, what you've done is you've made this something that, pretty much an everyday person can go at, they can engage in, and then you've got the scalability. So, it is all working very, very well. But I think at the level of aesthetics, one of the biggest problems historically, again, of sustainability, and even in our, sustainable architecture, is frankly, it's not been very beautiful. It's looked pretty poor when compared to some of the, if you like, glossier and sleeker designs of other eras. But, you've created something that is absolutely desirable. It's beautiful. And so, in your work, I'm seeing great maturity. I'm seeing very, very high level connectivity. And I think, that this is something that other design studios and schools need to be looking to, because although it's incredibly ambitious, you can't just magic this stuff up overnight. What you can do is you can, if you like, see the bar. You can see what actually happens when you have those spaces where there is that time to develop ideas, instead of just flitting between one idea and another, and this project and that, but actually having consistency in the research process. So I think it's a really wonderful work. Obviously, I know you work very well, but this last piece is it's blowing the lid off, as it were. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for your comment. And I kind of appreciate the fact that you have underlined the fact that we have been doing this for several years now. And I think in a sense, I was, this occasion in Venice was interesting because it sort of encouraged us to go and look back at what we presented there in 2008, which is now 13 years ago. And but in a way, I was noticing how at the time perhaps the topics and maybe even the design method was similar somehow, but in fact, how much has changed and since in terms of the expansion of all these different scales and all these different dimensions. And I think, of course, I think today was very exciting to be presenting together with all of these other great young architects and researchers, because of course it comes to a point in which this expansion requires the energy and the intellect and the talent of all these people. So I think that's very much where we are at this moment, and I think that's why also the connection between the studio, the practice, and the labs and so on is crucial, is critical, and that's really what enables us to do what we're doing at the moment.
Maybe I could just step in there and just ask, so is it in the Arsenale your products on show? Which of the
BIT.BIO.BOT is in the Corderia, is the entrance of the Arsenale. The beginning of the Arsenale, there are the second, third room. So you enter is the curator exhibition. And then we have this other drawing and video in the Italian pavilion and in the Future Assembly that is also the curator pavilion in the Giardini. But the BIT.BIO.BOT is in the Arsenale when you enter. And actually in the Arsenale, I see there were also Philip Beasley and few others that are exactly the same location. Akim is there, Akim Menges is there as well. And I would say it's in wave because the Biennale, because this Biennale is very coincidental, I think, that happened at the time of COVID, because it's a Biennale that already was touching issue of relationship with science, relationship with biology and technology, which are issues that have been, let's say, ignored or put aside by the latest couple of Biennale, I would say, that there were more looking at architecture from other point of view. So I would say it's quite coincidental that this Biennale already discussing this issue happened in the period of the pandemic, on the year of the pandemic. And I think it's great to be able to discuss this online as well because of how the year is structured. But I think it was good also to have an opening after 1 year of not opening, an opening in person. And I think they are planning to have a second one in August with as well more international participants and debate.
I was just thinking, just because, the Arsenale, it's an arsenal, is where they produced weapons. And if you think about it, we tend to think about sort of Venice as being this kind of one of the ultimate cities of history that is kind of, it speaks about tradition and so on in a almost static way. But in fact, Venice is the ultimate city of reinvention. It started off as a mercantile empire, has become increasingly a kind of tourist population and so on. And I think the Venice Biennale itself is part of that culture of reinvention. And you think about the individual spaces that have been transformed from arsenals into exhibition spaces and so on. I think that people have this tendency to think that things are kind of authorized by history, but history has always been reinventing itself, and no more so than Italy. You think about something like the Renaissance. That was really an incredibly forward-looking moment in the history of architecture, of culture as a whole, where it had been reinvented. And I just see that kind of the moment we're in that point of reinvention. But there's one particular issue I wanted to kind of raise in some senses, because the question of AI. AI has been a huge. It's a very topical issue right now in many ways. But at the same time, it's also kind of highlighted to us many of the problems. The whole discussion about bias in AI. I won't go into that. But one of the ones that really concerns me is NFTs. Did I get the right expression? Where people are now trying to exploit the possibility of blockchain and so on to make money. And that seems to me really kind of a retrogressive step in some ways. I'd like to think that we could actually use this moment to rethink the kind of the status of capitalism. The fact that actually Inclusive Futures, we are trying to reinvent education as not a kind of profit thing, but to understand that education is a human right and it's not the privilege of the rich and so on. And in some ways, there are some aspects though of AI, and of course it does consume huge energy in its production. There are some issues that I think that we need to be alert to as part of that kind of project.
I'd add on that. I mean, I absolutely agree that the absence of bias, as it were, in the, for example, slime mold's computing process in biocomputing is a wonderful attribute. And I do wonder, because with synthetic biology, that is in effect a means by which people can create bias in a biological system, in a synthetic biological system. And I'm just wondering, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I mean, I've seen a lot of very bad synthetic biology projects. And actually, I raised this in a podcast on computer-aided biology a couple of weeks ago. The fact that, for example, when people are altering the genetics of a tree so that it glows, they're often not considering, well, what will happen to the other organisms that live on the tree? How will it affect the wider local ecology? What about if we have to go dark and we can't turn the tree off because we've engineered it and so it glows? I mean, what we tend to be quite bad at imagining as a species scenarios that are very alien to us. In a sense, pandemics aren't, because they even predate our species. They're right back through the lineage. But one of the things I do wonder is, could there be people out there that are actually already engineering these, wild organisms, if you like, to ways that could become biased? And have you heard of that in your work? And have you considered that, or ways, other unintended problems? So, for example, with the system, with the architectural farming system, have you looked at, for example, what might happen if a particular malign organism, let's say, somehow or another got into the system? How might that be identified? Let's say not E. coli, but something nasty's in there. Have you looked at those sort of unintended consequences? And could you share some thoughts if you have?
Well, on the subject of synthetic biology, we have been collaborating both with Cambridge University, that with Tufts University in Boston, and we have been looking at different elements that could be reprogrammed related to architecture, in particular silk from silkworm and spider, but also we look for this system at microalgae, and we have been looking at how it's possible to eventually not completely reprogram, but intervene genetically on some species of microalgae to understand how inside of a photobioreactor that can be embedded in a home environment or even in a public space that, of course, is open to public, is different from a lab, so the medium can be contaminated. So how can we engineer organisms that are more resilient and able to create ecology of contamination that are positive ecology? So they are still able to be edible, they are still able to survive in the urban environment. So we've been looking at this, but I don't think there is a need. And then I've been participating, in particular in academic context, and multiple conferences on synthetic biology and biocomputation, when we look at how these affect different disciplines. Most of the time I was the only architect, and there were also not many female, I have to say, in the room. And they were mainly doctor and computer scientists, and looking at how we could develop computers that are entirely biological. But this could be the future, it might be the future. But my point is, I think what architecture can contribute is the development of material knowledge. And I think there is no point, if we have artificial intelligence, to completely erase it and go completely into biological intelligence. But there is a point in understanding in a deeper manner what we are dealing with, the tool we are interacting with. And I think visual languages and design can enable the end user to develop this type of knowledge. For example, in understanding some step of synthetic biology, in understanding in terms of artificial intelligence, which kind of system are we interacting with? Which kind of energy we are effectively consuming? where is the limit, how much we can afford. Because you know, consumption and energy production are also contextualized. I'm not zero energy, the planet is not zero energy. It's not about zero energy, it's about resilient system. And resilient system are so because they're interconnected and there is a shared platform of knowledge. So if we work with artificial intelligence, then we need to develop a deeper level of understanding, not only of the tool, but of the overall mechanism and how we can interact with it in specific area of knowledge so that we work with an ecosystem of tools.
Maybe in that sense, Claudia, the experimentation with the slime mold or with the spiders that we have done, I think it becomes at that level also a little bit of a metaphor to understand the spatial and material implication of the notion of intelligence. I think this is probably what architecture can bring to the discourse, because again, like the fact that these definitions like artificial intelligence are let's say largely defined inside of the realm of computer science or medicine or other, just makes them completely removed from spatial, geographical, material dimension. So I think that it's our task to actually bring that to life, not to realize that any form of intelligence has a material, spatial, geographical dimension. And so without that, it will never become kind of ecologically meaningful, we can say. And I think that's goes along with all of the new technology associated with computation, as well as cryptocurrencies and all the other elements that come with blockchain and so on, which on one side philosophically, conceptually have clearly interesting aspects that that are already being picked up from the kind of social political perspective. Materially, architecturally, geographically, they are largely unexplored. And I think unless we do that, unless we are able to kind of build a kind of paradigm, an architectural paradigm for these concepts, then they will never become embedded in an ecologically sensible way in our cities or in the way our society actually inhabits the planet. And since we are an urbanizing society, of course, it will very much implies the our conception of city.
I just wanted to say actually something else I think that more generally you do very well in your work that a lot of people don't do, is you actually create what are closed architectural systems in effect very well. I mean, the system we see behind you is to all intents and purposes a closed system, meaning that you have some level of control on it. And one of the big problems I think in architecture at the moment is the fact that many are proposing what are in effect open systems. So for example, putting lots of foliage on a tower block or green roofs and what have you, without actually understanding even the most basic risks. So for example, one of my peers in sustainability was talking about the fact that she lives in a very high tower in East London, and one of her neighbours had put some foliage on the balcony and some pigeons had come to nest there. And at first they thought that this was ever so cute and they were, looking at the pigeons daily until they contracted a disease which is carried by pigeons, and then up went the pigeon nets. And that there is, there's a lot of that in that we often see these projects that, if you like, just think of foliage and the biological world as decor. It's like, they think of it like putting up wallpaper without actually understanding this interactivity. But what is expressed very well in your work is that there is a clear definition between the open system and the closed system. And I'd really like to see a lot more architects actually looking to develop these what are in effect closed systems, but that are addressing closed systems that are addressing open issue problems, and acknowledging the fact that although in an ideal world we would be able to live in symbiosis with every other species on the planet, the reality is somewhat different, and so there does need to be that level of control. And I think architects and designers are very well positioned to do that in a way that, you know, for example, in the science community, science for all of its assets, it's not trained as a community to implement, research or implement kind of steps that take you to that end system, as it were. So, you know, I hope that your work is both at this event and at others actually sparking that that nugget of inspiration for others to explore the same sort of approach that you've applied.
Well, that this reconnect in a way to what Neil was mentioning before about the air conditioning. I see the pigeon and the air conditioning on the same level here as a material system, because there is a level of design that I think needs to go in this renewed interaction between energetic system as well as biological system and the built environment. It cannot simply be by chance. It could self-organize, is this level of self-organization is design, but if there is no design and understanding of the behavior, then it's difficult to have an interaction. We are at the same point in which we are now. We often say, you know, climate change exists, but the planet change continuously. The problem is not the fact that there is change. Change is just inherent to the planet. The fact is that the change is out of control, is not known, is disrupted. We don't understand the change that are going on as user of the city dweller. So the question is, how do we interact with these changes in a different manner, understand them, and how design allow us to have an interface with this system and eventually interact with air conditioning, or air, but not as it is intended now, or microclimate, interact with microclimate as well as wildlife in the city in a way, in a moderated manner. So to establish more positive dynamic. I see there are some questions.
Yeah, I think Gustavo, you've been posting some. Do you want to ask a question? I mean, just to say, if anybody does have any questions on anyone on YouTube and Bilibili, please put them in the chat, and we can open up and address them. Maybe
Sure, I had a question. Sure, I had a quick question. Sorry about that, Neil. My question was, thank you very much for your project. Very inspirational. I was actually thinking about the idea of systems right now, and there's kind of the ethical and moral imperatives of inspiring governments for change. But my question specifically is, how do you guys foresee the incorporation of quantum computing with the idea of understanding and maybe keeping track of systems? Like, what are those implications for architects, research, and then this, I guess, the city, how we all organize together? Thank you.
Who is this for? Shall I pick it up? I think that if we go for the ethical and moral implications, I think that it's quite obvious to me how the expansion of the definition of we, like we were mentioning before, kind of brings this implication within itself, in a sense, because I think the question is, as Claudia was also mentioning, not so much a question, let's say, of balancing the number of men and women or people of different backgrounds and so on, but it's really a question of kind of completely redescribing the categories. And so in the moment we bring a new definition of we that cuts across different categories of living system and organism, and human and non-human, organic and unorganic, then in that sense we are capable of observing a completely different level of interaction between these systems. And I think that's in a way what this project tries to bring forward, is to create an environment or a space where, let's say, this categorization, these divisions are somewhat lost, and it is possible to kind of open up a different kind of interaction. I think that's when you look at it at the level of the urban system, where you start growing in scale, of course the number of implications and interactions becomes enormous. And I think in that sense, a different form of computing that goes beyond the limitation of the current paradigm, related to the silicium and transistor and the systems that we are using for digital computation. It's essential. And again, I think without this kind of redescription or redefinition of the boundaries of computation, I think we will not be able to achieve this kind of leap in ecological efficiency or ecological, let's say, intelligence for our systems, for our urban systems. So when we talk about urban sphere, which is a kind of definition we kind of developed in this year, so to try to refer to a kind of a new vision of the biosphere that is now very much transformed, of course, by the impact of humans, and that's the whole Anthropocene paradigm. But it is also conversely, as we were saying, a condition where the human system is no longer entirely human. It's no longer entirely under our control and understanding. So, that's where, again, these categories or the boundaries between these categories becomes more and more blurred, and where intelligence and where computation reside physically as well as conceptually also becomes more and more blurred. And I think it's a leap that, of course, concerns architecture, but it's a leap that also very much is connected to the transition in computing and computation from, let's say, the digital computational paradigm, to quantum computing, other forms of computation, and memory storage. And Melissa was mentioning, of course, the possibility to think about living organisms as actually becoming storages of information, and in that sense becoming part of computational systems in a much more active way. I think these frontiers are really the one that we are kind of pointing at with our work, very much already, with the title of this project, hinting at the idea that the cells within our reactors are themselves, let's say, informational entities within this new paradigm. And so there is really no distinction anymore.
Yeah, in a way, the work that was presented in the last two presentations, implying the relationship between biological computation and artificial intelligence, is really on the line of trying to understand how we move on from pure digital computation to other form of computation. We have been looking also into quantum computing, especially in Innsbruck, because the Department of Physics of the University of Innsbruck is one of the most advanced on the subject, and we looked at mineral computation. Yeah, in the meantime, I have a lot of harvesting going on here. Now Giacomo arrived as well. And so this was really, really about trying to understand how material in itself could become a medium of computation, and how material practice could become part of our life on the other end. And so all the two scales. On the other hand, at the moment, the main application we have been developing, especially with UN, are about transferring biological intelligence to digital algorithm. This is what is applicable at the moment and is possible to transform in interface, and to work directly only with biological computation. It's proving quite challenges for design in terms of means, but it's possible to interface different means. And I think that's where also, as I said before, awareness needs to come out on how we deal with these different tools.
Maybe I could it's great to have Melissa with us today. And Melissa has just completed her doctorate, as I understand it, working in similar sort of territory. I just wonder, maybe Melissa, you might like to say a few words about what your preoccupations have been in your research agenda, and how these preoccupations kind of relate to the issues that we've been discussing today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I actually finished it in 2018, but I've had the research has been ongoing as a continuum. My work actually has a lot of parallels with Claudia and Marco's. My particular research question was looking at how ecological systems in fire-prone regions, the study area being California, have inherent resistance and resilience to wildfire. And I found that there are essentially 3 different types of resilience program, and they are synced with the fire frequency. So some species of plant are adapted to fires that are very frequent, every couple of years, others every couple of decades, and others for longer still. And they're qualitatively distinct in that the strategies for one form of resilience absolutely would not work for another. And architecturally, that was very interesting, because essentially what it was pointing to is the fact that at the worst case scenario, which is the infrequent scenario, you're looking at such intensities that there really is no known way that even within the coming decades of advancement, we could possibly create something that was resilient to those types of fires. To give you an idea, you're looking at intensities of around 1,000 degrees. You're looking at fires that accelerate at speeds that nearly break the sound barrier. So at that level, there has to be an acceptance, as it were, of architectural loss. But that's actually programmed into the species in that they, once the fire passes, all of the resources that are made available are essentially recycled. So you've got the space, you've got the light, you've got the soil, the nutrients that have been released back into the ground. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got the very frequent fires that are actually very low intensity, and you can build architectural resilience to those fires, and particularly if you understand the landscape topology, if you understand how the both the levels of the landscape, the wind conditions, and all these different factors shape the fire. And that's the sort of thing where the sort of biocomputing that Marco and Claudia in the studio do are absolutely applicable. But from a biocomputing perspective, there are so many possibilities. And I think one of the key things, if we're thinking about whether or not these things will actually become a reality, if, let's say, 30 years from now, we're actually going to see these applied in a commercial market wherein we integrate them into commercial real estate developments and so forth. As with anything else, it's about the return on the investment, in that if you are creating architectures that are going to be standing for a relatively long period of time, because they have the capacity that with the right adaptations and design, form and so forth, they can endure, then absolutely you can splice the biological with the electronic in that. And that's what we're seeing at the leading edge studios. From Microsoft research over the past 20 years, a number of researchers have gone independent, and they've set up some of the most interesting artificial intelligence studios in the world. And the kind of scale that they're operating is they are taking many, many millions of data points, constellations of data from across land, sea, air, and they're processing that with artificial intelligence at phenomenal speeds. And so they're able to give you a reading that says, right, this is where we're at. And then they're able to model, and so that they can, again, very accurately predict what the events that are going to follow in a certain time frame are going to be. And when they're doing that, they are actually interfacing with the natural environment. So, for example, one of the more recent breakthroughs is actually being able to read plant signals and actually understand what, obviously plants are incredibly sensitive to the environment, and that the major barrier before was that they could if you like, detect that a plant was stressed and it was saying, you know, something's wrong, I'm going into this or that protection mode. But before, they weren't actually able to identify what the stressor was. Therefore, from a sort of a data processing perspective, it wasn't useful information. But now we're at that point where that level, that granular level of detail is being integrated. And so in these labs, we're most certainly seeing, yeah, it's the hybridization of biological and artificial intelligence, data that is literally being pulled from the level of space from satellites down to nanotechnologies. And again, one of the great things that artificial intelligence can do now is it can actually, they can, through smart pipe installations and so forth, they can actually interrogate pollutants and changes in the environment at the nanoscopic scale. And this can, again, this data is fed into this matrix of information. So we are on the cusp of what, from an architectural perspective and a societal level, is a major transition. And I think understanding how we actually integrate this into architecture is going to be something we're going to contend with for a number of decades. But certainly from my own research, one of the key things that we had to think about in terms of how we adapt architectures is actually syncing them temporally. So we're not just thinking at the spatial level, but we're actually thinking in terms of time. And of course, this is all built on earlier theory, earlier speculation, Cedric Price and so on. But you know, now we have got the tools to actually be able to do some incredibly intelligent stuff. So yeah, I would say that those are the main things. But the other key thing as well, and that I think is really going to be a potentially big barrier to actually implementing the most interesting of the possibilities, is the fact that if we are going to generate, as it were, these new architectures, we're going to have to completely rewrite our building codes, which in turn means major shifts in policy. And of course, that for me, when I was looking at the potentialities, that was the hardest thing, because there are so many vested interests, there are so many conflicts of opinion, you're dealing with the psychology of how you respond to change and so forth. So at the design level, it's an extraordinary space. But at the level of reality, I think it's going to be challenging because it is such a big transition.
Thanks, Melissa. I mean, being in California right now, I think there are two issues that, I mean, not just the kind of the wildfires, and they are wildfires every week. We can, you know, go to the beach and I can see these things above quite regularly, but also the question, of course, of drought. While the rest of the world has got too much water in some senses, we've got too little. And I guess the message is kind of we ignore biology at our peril. And I think now is kind of a term we need to kind of we need a time we need to kind of take this on board. And of course, the pandemic itself is another kind of manifestation of that. So there's a question here in the YouTube thing from Luis Matias. Thank you very much for the exhibition. I'm very interested in changing my mindset, and beginning to understand how living systems can build the cities of the future. My question is directed towards this: how to begin to implement this type of technology and philosophy in mainstream academia.
Well, in academia, I think is already quite there. I'm not sure what is
mainstream.
Mainstream academia. I'm not sure what do we mean, but I think in academia is there. The question that was raised also by Melissa is how do you integrate in the built environment, and beyond the steps of the Biennale, what we are currently doing is integrating this system by creating relationship with some industry from the corporate sector. We started with the fashion industry that now is been suffering for the COVID environment, but we have quite good project with the medical industry and the food industry that we are carrying on, and we will communicate in the next month that are applying in a more permanent manner this idea, and especially the biotechnology related to design, the design innovation aspect of our research in the built environment. In terms of academia, I think there are branches or environment that are already looking at the integration between design and science. I would say that more than academia, we need to really create a tighter relationship between research and built work, and between the different level of academia, because the problem are not the academic environment. I think even in the so-called mainstream academia, certain ideas are circulating. One of the issues is when students arrive to university already with ideas of what architecture should be. And being often in the Department of Urban Design and Landscape Architecture, for example, for many of the younger students, when they arrive, aesthetic is a taboo. And landscape is gardening, doing a bit of gardening in front of the building. And so in very high-level academia, in mainstream academia, this is a preconception that I think is a consequence of the relationship between research, high-level research, and built environment. They need to be tighter so that certain ideas are not circulating only in academia, are circulating in politics, are circulating in social environment, and these are more societal change rather than simply a change at the academic level, which I think at that level is already happening.
I guess that's also why the work you're doing, Neil, with this program is extraordinary, and I think necessary, because I think that's the key, is to reach not only a wider audience as possible, but even younger audience, and even audience that, you know, it's beyond the typical realm of architecture. You know, that's, I think that's the real challenge, because as Claudia was saying, I think one of the issues is that often students already come in year one, and you have to rebuild their way of thinking, that, you know, towards the built environment, because essentially in society there is a very little understanding of what is possible to do with the innovation in our discipline. I think there is maybe, you know, it's one of the most misunderstood disciplines, I would say, and I think that, you know, bringing academia outside of the academic, or creating a new definition of academic or education, I think it's the main challenge, and I think what can really accelerate this process, because of course there are so many curious minds out there, and they just need the you know, the sparkle to begin to create.
It's really what the definition of architecture that we craft is for the general public, and how we communicate this definition of architecture before we change, I think, the academic environment. That is already changing, but the issue is how architecture is perceived. I have often the impression, before Neil mentioned the Renaissance, and I often have the impression that we are still at the same definition of architecture, while the socio-political, ecological environment is completely changed. And even the tool, you know, we are from the perspective view as main tool for architecture, talking about artificial intelligence, but I have the impression that society is still defining architecture with the same definition that is interrelated with a socio-political work, methodological work of the Renaissance. So that doesn't fit, and that, I think, it's one of the biggest issues in relating academia to build work, but also in related academic research to the expectation of the student often.
If I can say, oh, sorry.
Go for it.
No, if I can say, to continue with something that Claudia was mentioning about, and Gustavo asking how about the speculative design methodologies. In my experience, like as a recent student, changing to these speculative design methods, I think that it's quite important, like that part of forgetting, like for students to forget what they know about typologies and what is a building, what is a street, and open to be open to the idea that you can create new typologies and you can create new environments. And as Claude says, landscapes are not gardening, but eventually become a combination of different programs that you need to stop relating them to what you know right now. And I think it's trying to create your own typologies and create your own connections and your own definition of street and living. And I don't know, I think that's like my opinion about it, that you need to remove what you know of what is your current typology of human landscapes or cities, and be open to new type of architecture in a way.
Yeah, maybe I could just chip in there. I mean, it does strike me as it depends on your definition of architecture, and of course, we actually have two. I always like the definition or the distinction, let's say, that Stanford Anderson, the architectural historian from MIT, would make between the discipline and the profession, and they're very different in many ways. The discipline, in some ways, is thriving as a kind of field of exploration, and we saw incredible evidence of this. There is a practice, of course, involved with this, but it's a kind of, let's say, an academic practice versus the profession that doesn't have the luxury of being able to engage in that kind of research. There are some places where I think of Zaha Code, for example, where they deliberately kind of make sure that there's enough funding that goes into sort of some of the research, but largely they are governed by what's coming in terms of the projects they're doing. And I think this in some ways is the real crisis in sense for architecture, is it's based largely on the cost of the building. That's your profit, and that you have to work within those constraints. In other words, we find ourselves as, or the profession finds itself as pitted against those kind of environmental concerns, because it's governed by a kind of a financial imperative, to make as much profit in order to survive. And I think this is kind of like, in a way, a collision that we're coming into right now, where we're trying to introduce more kind of ethical, environmental, and social concerns, which maybe are pitted against the kind of the commercial drive that underpins the profession.
Not necessarily are. They are in the current status quo, and that's why we need to discuss with students and work with students and researchers to be able to have a methodology and stand for your idea and find way to integrate them in the work environment. Also because I think this segregation between academia and that looks at speculation and the work environment of the profession that looks at the economy, it's again coming from the segregation of the first industrial revolution, that not only segregated production of food from the living quarter, but also segregated production from thinking, as if in the moment we think we can't produce. But that's not necessarily the case, because there are a lot of even policy at the moment that look at ecology, and there are a lot of opportunity for design innovation to actually be more economically viable than what is considered mainstream architecture. But the problem, I think, the issue is how you are able to craft your idea of architecture and bring it out there and integrate inside of an economical system that already exists and running, which I don't know if I would call profession of architecture or of construction. This, I have a little bit of a struggle there, because in my opinion is a machine that feeds itself of construction, but that has lose the view of what is architecture could be, or the direction that could go, and would actually highly benefit also economically from a tighter relationship with academia and discourse on ecology. By looking at the longer projection of ecology, I'm sure there are a lot of economists that can look into how economy can benefit from the ecological discourse if you look at it in the long term and not in the immediate turnover.
Yeah, I think it seems to me we're at a moment in history where we really have to redefine our terms and see that tradition itself, as I'm saying in the context of Venice, is a living thing that is evolving, emerging and changing. It's not static. It's responding to societal needs and environmental needs and so on. And that's in some ways, the idea that we should be looking forward rather than necessarily backwards, even though we're in the kind of the historical Venice, as it were, is so important. And I really appreciate seeing Giacomo and Lulu, because that's the generation, in many ways, playing around with your thing. That's the generation that we're dealing with, and that in many ways has been the kind of the kind of logic behind digital futures. The word futures has always been in everything we were doing. We're talking about the futures, inclusive futures, and so on, to try and rethink and to imagine, in a sense, how we can make the world better. I was once asked when I was teaching in the UK by the RIB how I defined architecture, and I remember giving this kind of comment that it's not just simply the design of building, it's about imagining a better future world. And I think that is the capacity of architects, is to speculate, to imagine, to plan, to look forward to the future, and to use that sort of imagination to make the world a better place. And I really got the sense today that we've got some astonishingly sort of dynamic and provocative ideas about reinventing the world and trying to make it a better place. This has been a fantastic discussion. We ought at some point now to move on to the final section, where we're going to just say a few words about the Inclusive Futures agenda, which of course today was completely part of it. To have so many strong female voices, it was really wonderful. But we have in 2 days' time, talking about the future, 2 days' time, we have we have the submission deadline. So we wanted to kind of say a few more about see a few more words about some of our of the workshops and so on. And I want to invite my colleague Virginia, who has been working incredibly hard behind the scenes in helping to put together this incredible project for the summer, where we have 100 plus workshops and 20 plus discussions. But what I think is really wonderful, and it's almost symptomatic of this kind of the group today, is that we're working with many different sort of cultures, many different languages. It's the first time that we've ever had workshops in 12 different languages, and that includes not just English and Chinese and Spanish and Portuguese, but also languages like Farsi and Arabic and Indonesian and Bangladeshi and so on. So maybe I could invite Virginia to kind of just to make a few comments about the workshops. Virginia?
Yes, great. Thank you, Neil. I'm just going to share my screen briefly to look at these workshops here. So for many of you who are wanting to register for our workshops, you have already visited our website. If you have not, you can see a quick tour here. But if you're interested in the Digital Consortium lectures, they are here under this button. But I'm going to address the workshops mostly. And as Neil mentioned, when you click on workshops, we have over 100 here to scroll through. So it can be a bit overwhelming when you first visit our site, but it's easy to sort all the themes, types of workshops, because we do have some that are hybrid or physical workshops. But language is super important here, as Neil mentioned, that we have so many in different languages, and especially some really more diverse languages than in the past. So we have a workshop in Turkish on AI. We have workshops in Farsi and English, as well as ones that are completely in Farsi. So if your English is not good, you know, there's options for you at the introductory level of Grasshopper and more advanced coding level as well. We have Russian workshops, so several that will be happening in Russian. Particularly this one, Beyond Matter, is taught by one of our team members, Maria, and she's been organizing a lot of the workshops and is actually one of Claudia's students at Innsbruck. So please consider signing up for that workshop. You know, so, and Spanish workshops, we have a lot of Spanish workshops. We have a lot of people who follow us in South America speaking Spanish, and also Portuguese as well. So please flip through some of these languages. to be able to explore if your English is not great and you want to be able to take a workshop in those languages. But I just want to highlight a few workshops by some really great people as well. So we have Kaiho Yu is teaching at the Agavante in Vienna, and his workshop is going to be dealing with robots and AI. And I don't know if I can play these little videos here, but these are some of the results from his workshop last year, where he was using AI to kind of automate movement of robots within an environment. Really exciting stuff. So definitely look into this workshop if you are still searching around. Highly recommended. We also have the Digital Unforgetting, an exercise towards inclusive archiving. So as part of our approach to inclusive futures, we've tried to have a few workshops that are directly addressing inclusivity, like Indigenous knowledge and inclusivity and archiving. And so Nidhi Odor, who actually presented at one of our young presentations earlier this year and is now working at the Canadian Centre for Architecture, will be leading this workshop. And it's going to deal with storytelling, archiving, memories. So it's going to be very theoretical. So if you're not really a tool-based person, but care about inclusivity and thoughts, this will be a great workshop for you. I already mentioned here Beyond Matter. This one is going to be in Russian. So if you want to learn AI and Russian things in VR, it's going to be great. Hierarchical modularity and growability in space architecture is also going to be a really nice workshop here. You can see a quick video. I don't know if there's sound to these videos, but this is taught by Satoru. So if you're in the Asian Pacific time zone, Satoru is extremely talented and going to be working with these kind of modularity systems. And I really highly recommend this workshop. So please consider to apply to this one. And lastly, Rachel Armstrong, who has participated in several of our events and taught an amazing workshop last year. You can go and find that kind of results on our YouTube channel from last year here. But definitely this workshop is going to be really amazing as well, because Rachel Armstrong, she's just so talented, super smart. And really, I believe that this was one of the workshops last year that got a lot of positive response. So if you're into kind of design fictions and things like this, really consider this workshop taught by Rachel Armstrong at Newcastle. Thank you.
Maybe you could just leave the your screen back on again, Virginia. I'll also say a few words about the lectures. Could we perhaps go to the page for yes? So first of all, the lectures are something that we've abstracted out of the main section this year, so that you can listen to the lectures and do the workshop at the same time. And importantly, you can go to the lectures on top of your workshop. It doesn't mean that it's not as though you're limited to your thing. You can sign up for workshop, and you can sign up individually for all of these particular lectures. And they're starting earlier. So they're starting this time next week, this time on Saturday in 7 days' time. It's going to be incredibly exciting. We are kicking off with the extraordinary Slavoj Žižek. I mean, he is the most entertaining and spectacular thinker in the world today. The most dangerous thinker in the West. He's been described as the Elvis of cultural theory. If you don't know him, you should just have a look at him or Google him. He is unbelievably entertaining and very charismatic and idiosyncratic in his own particular way. I've been in conferences where when he's been on, the people are kind of all the steps that we're contravening all the fire codes. People on the steps, they're hanging from the chandeliers. I mean, this is one of the first times he's ever been on in an architectural stage, and I really recommend him. He is unbelievably provocative and entertaining as a thinker. So in 7 days' time, we will kick off with Slavoj Žižek, and I can't think of a better way to start this incredible Inclusive Futures project than to go with him. Then if we could scroll down slightly, we have another series of sessions on architecture and philosophy, where you may not know these people. You may not know these people, but they are the best. We literally have cherry picked some of the best people in the world. Sanford Quinter is mesmerizing. He's the smartest guy I know in architectural culture. Some of his comments are just terrifyingly smart, and he's always got a provocative mind. Following him, we have Mamal Delanda, who is someone who changed my perception of architecture. Back about 20 years ago, I was invited as a just come out of college almost. I was teaching at Columbia, and I became a student in a sense. Went to Delanda's talks. He is incredible. I would also say that I went more recently. I've invited him to be as a visiting professor, and what is interesting about Mamal Delanda is that that all the Chinese students, they absolutely love him because he's so clear. So definitely someone worth listening to. Ana Maria Duran Callisto is kind of interesting because she is from South America. She works on the Amazon in a very environmentally aware way, and has a really interesting take on questions about what we mean by the notion of architecture and so on. It's absolutely fascinating what she has to say. Erin Manning is a rock star in her own way in the world of art and philosophy. Those who know her in architecture are astonished by her. So we're introducing some people that you wouldn't otherwise know, but you can guarantee that that we've cherry picked some of the most interesting people out there. I'm there because I'm organizing it, and then Patrick Schumacher, whom you know, I think as of course the director of now in charge of Zaha Hadid Architects, but he also has a background. Before he was an architect, he was a philosopher, and actually he has some very interesting things to say on philosophy as such. The next session is which is going along in parallel. Actually, this is unfortunately for the Europeans is not so easy to watch because it's going to be on during the nighttime for you guys, but it's in the morning in China, and it's in the evening in the States. And that is a series of lectures, of panel discussions, shall we say, called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Artificial Intelligence. I mean, you've probably heard of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is itself a very interesting book, and it's the Bible, as it were, or at least the most inspirational book for Elon Musk, one of the key people in terms of trying to introduce AI into the world through Tesla, through SpaceX, through Neuralink, and so on. And it's been taking inspiration from that. So, and AI is a hugely important area of concern right now, as we found out today. We actually are working, Matthias Del Campo and I are working with Neil Spiller, who was Melissa's PhD supervisor, and who is now the editor of AD, on an issue of AD and architecture, which is really it's an incredibly vibrant area. So, but this is really a kind of introduction for those of you who don't know much about it, trying to highlight some of the kind of key issues. What is AI? How do we see AI in terms of creativity? How can we follow on from some of the inspirational work of media artists like Refik Anadol? How is it kind of beginning to encroach on the world of architectural design itself, and how a new software has been developed for the Architecture Office of the Future? And then finally, a session on the city of the future, where I'm delighted to have Sidewalk Labs being presented. And actually, they're relatively unknown, but they're newcomers in the field. But they are, what's so interesting about Sidewalk Labs is they combine AI with questions about environmental concerns. That's, you know, they're hugely inspirational in the way they approach things. And so anyway, we're putting together what I think is going to be an incredible series of discussions. And alongside that, we've got then, following on from that, we have a series of lectures that my colleague Philip Yuan is organizing on performance-based computational design or digital design methodologies. We haven't got the names of those that are going there. I haven't got the dates there, but they are there. Please sign up. Akim Menges, of course, is one of the kind of the crucial figures in this world. Philippe Bloch, and then some young guys. Masoud, who was presenting a few weeks ago, is a really super smart young Iranian guy who's burst onto the scene and is going to be one of the figures in the future. So these are going to be astonishing. We've also got a doctoral symposium where we have invited certain individual researchers who have been working on their doctoral theses to present their work. And just to say, this is the whole idea about this project, is to try and create a platform whereby we can bring people together without kind of, let's say, damaging environmental things. We're working online. We've realized that you can do this, and you can bring people together. And what's more, the fact that you can have a global platform, and many of these sessions are happening at this same moment of time that we have our Digital Futures thing, when everyone could come together. You can have a global platform, which means that that it's no longer the kind of world where you have one professor in one classroom talking to one group of students. Rather, we have a global platform where you can share information, and that is part of the whole kind of thrust towards the sharing economy. So this is the first, in a way, the first part of this initiative to try and see how we can use this platform to spread educational ideas across the world. It's the impact on the workshop. So please, could you please. The deadline is also for Monday, so that's your chance to really to really be there in the same kind of, on the same platform as some of the greats in architectural culture, in design culture, and indeed in the case of Slavoj Žižek in terms of philosophy itself. So there's the opportunity, and the important thing, what I want to stress about this. Everything we're doing is free. And that is part of our project. We want to sort of see how we can extend these ideas and open up to new cultures. And one of the things I want to say is so gratifying about this year's project, Inclusive Futures, is not just the fact that we have so many different languages. Farsi and Arabic and Bangladesh and Indonesian and Russian and Spanish and Portuguese and Chinese and English and so on and so on and so on, but also the fact that we are reaching out across the world. I was told just recently that some of the students who signed up for my workshop are in Uganda and Kenya, and this is, I think, an incredible way where we can take the agenda of Venice, this astonishing provocative question that Hashim Sarkis posed to us: how will we live together in the future? And we can say, this is how we will live together in the future. And it's a vision about the future where we can all share our knowledge, that we're not sort of trying to compete with others, but rather to be generous and open up and share that knowledge around. So anyway, so on Monday you've got 48 hours roughly to make your final decisions. It's all I can say is that I'm looking forward to that. As part of the agenda of the future, I'm looking forward to that, and to all these incredible workshops that are going on. There are more than 100 different workshops with some of the most inspirational figures in the world out there. So please, if you've signed up, tell your colleagues, tell your friends, tell all the students around the world. This is a real opportunity to be part of what is a kind of seen as a progressive platform to help to reinvent what education is. It's not about education just for the elite, just for the wealthy. It's the idea of education as a human right that everyone can be part of. So I just want to kind of finally sort of wrap up by thanking our team together. It was Neil, such an inspiration. Yep.
I just want to go over the application for everyone. So for the Digital Consortium lectures, you do have to fill out this Google form here. So when you open that, there's a Google form you have to fill out with just a few information, so we can kind of get to know you a little bit before you attend. And you have to do it for each session individually, because some people might be interested in one session or another. But once you have filled out the form and all the applications are in on June 7th, we will then send the Zoom links out to you sometime next week. So everyone who has applied, just wait until next week. You will get your Zoom links sent to you, and you have to make sure you apply to all of them individually. So if you apply to just the first one, you may not be automatically registered for the others. So please make sure you do apply to all of them, because they're all great. And for applying to workshops, you do need to log in. So if you go to the top right, you will see a button that says sign in. I'm already signed into my account. And when you go to my page, give it 1 second. Oh, so you have to sign in very quickly here. So you have to register an account, but you will need to fill out my information to be able to apply to the workshop. So make sure you fill out all your information here. This is where you'll be able to put your samples of your work and stuff for the instructors to be able to see your applications. And so when you go to those workshop pages, you will see the apply button here. And just please remember that you cannot change your applications once they've been made. So you can apply to 3 workshops. So your chances are good to get in. And when you go to my page, you will see them, the workshops that you've applied to here. And the results will again be announced sometime next week after the instructors have had time to review all the applications that are due after the 7th. So application system is still open. Keep applying. It's very easy. You just got to make sure that you fill in all your information. And for the consortium, please remember to fill in each of the Google Forms separately so that you can attend all of the sessions.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you. And thank you. I want to also thank the team behind this. I mean, I keep on referring to this as a kind of like an iceberg. You can see 10%, but there's 90% below the water, even as the icebergs shrink. That's still the case. But this whole project doesn't happen without the incredible generosity and commitment of a group of individuals who freely give their time, who volunteer their time for nothing. And it's about, this is the generosity, the kind of the culture of sharing that we're trying to promote as a way of overcoming this kind of the greediness, shall we say, of what has been pervasive so far within the educational system. And I mean, without them, this wouldn't happen. So it's been astonishing. So this is fantastic to be able to see. Can I also thank today our various guests, not just Marco and Claudia, but also Irene, Corbinian, and if I missed someone out, Oscar,
Claudia, Aka,
and Melissa as well.
Melissa.
I mean, fantastic. But I want to say a special thanks. I think the 2 stars of the show were Giacomo and Lulu. It was because they are the people, they are the ones for whom we're doing this. We're doing this for the future of our planet. And thank you so much for such an inspirational session, everybody. And we look forward to meeting up next week. So just to repeat, next week we kick off the beginning of Inclusive Futures. We have Slavoj Žižek, incredible rock star, the first time almost ever he's been in an architectural audience. And then we have 2 weeks of sessions, and then we have the opening ceremony on the 27th of June, followed by these incredible workshops, and we wrap up on the 4th of July, I think it is, with the closing ceremony. It is going to be a very intensive period, but a very invigorating period. And thank you so much, everyone, for such an invigorating and intensive session today. It's been absolutely fabulous. Grazie mille. Grazie.
So,
Thank you.
thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.